Hey, it's Courtney, and I'm going to take a minute right now and help dispel some of the darkness. I'm a pretty big fan of a guy named Sadhguru, and according to Sadhguru, the word guru means dispeller of darkness. Another word that gets used is Kashi. That's a Sanskrit word which means a column of light. Here in the West, in the United States, Canada, we often use the metaphor of a lighthouse. The only way to dispel the darkness is with light. On your screen is a metaphor for the darkness, the deep, dark forest that we're all born into. Another way to conceptualize it is I love this thing called the Sea of Anomie. Anomie is a French word. It basically means confusion. The next video I drop will explain that in detail. We don't need to go into it right now. It's the sea of confusion that everybody is adrift, floating in this turbulent sea, this ocean of confusion. Specifically, today we're going to talk about this guy, Peter Drucker, because Peter Drucker is an intellectual goat, and it's not particularly debatable. One thing that people frequently mention is that he supposedly said this thing that culture eats strategy for breakfast. This might seem like a small thing, but it's not. It's a big thing. And that's why I'm going to take a few minutes to dispel the darkness because not only did Peter Drucker not say that, he wouldn't say it, and it's not true. It's BS. And this is a real problem. If the truth will set you free, that's biblical, right? We need the truth. Back to Sadhguru, he would say that the only authority is truth. It's pretty wise. But look what I did here. I went to Google and I searched up, did Drucker teach that business culture is centrally important? And Gemini, the AI version of Google, answers yes. Peter Drucker taught that business culture is centrally important, viewing it as a powerful force that shapes behavior, influences performance, and can even override strategy, famously stating, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Congratulations, Gemini. You're wrong. You're wrong. You know, we have all this ballyhoo about AI. Oh, AI, AI. It's the new thing. It's taken over. Meh, I'm not so convinced. It's going to be a huge thing in the future, no question about that. But right now, it is unbelievably underwhelming. The hype has gotten pretty much out of control. Here, let me show you something actually. Um, I'll look it up here right now. John Kenneth Galbraith. This is a gentleman who passed not too long ago, but he was a economist at Harvard University. If you haven't read this book, you're being derelict. You should read this book, especially young men. It's called The Short History of Financial Euphoria, and it will explain all of the craziness associated with artificial intelligence. Now, similarly, we're going through another bit of insanity called cryptocurrency. And if I've already got you on the defensive, because I realize when you're born into the sea of enemy, you're lost and confused and very often insecure. I understand. I'm not trying to make you insecure. I'm actually trying to be that Kashi, that lighthouse that will help you. But cryptocurrency is a bubble that will burst. Mark my word. And this book, in only about 100 pages, will show you the pattern that repeats itself over and over and over. And as a general rule, general pattern, what happens is young men get all whooped up on this euphoria. Oh, this is the new way of doing things. And they promote the hell out of it, inflate a bubble, and it pops. We saw this in the 90s. A very obvious example was what's called the dot-com bubble. All the euphoria about the internet. It popped in the year 2000. Remember Y2K is when it burst. Now, here we are 30 years later, 2025, and the internet is everywhere. It did live up to the hype, but it took 30 years from the initiation. Initiation. That's very standard. And some of them are just BS, as you're going to see in this book, and you may have heard before. In Holland, they had something called tulip mania. This was hundreds of years ago, but where they literally bid up the price, a bubble, and a speculative bubble inflated around the plant, the flower called a tulip. It is literally organic matter, and as we know, it decays. And yet, for a hot minute, it became more valuable. Tulips became more valuable than gold. This is not uncommon. These sorts of speculative, insane bubbles, this euphoria happens, and this book is phenomenal. It explains it. AI gets stuff wrong so much, and here's one particular example. It's not trying to say AI won't be amazing 30 years from now. It will be, almost certainly. I don't think cryptocurrency is going to go very far. I understand the blockchain. Don't come for me. Don't assume I don't understand the blockchain. I understand holographics and things like that. I very much understand. Will it be a currency? Probably not. If I were to speculate, there will always be room for NFTs, but it'll be something of a fringe market. NFTs, collectibles, okay, we're going to talk more about that here in a second. It'll probably apply more in the legal profession, like with the authentication of documents, contracts, evidence, things like that, if I were to guess. But I'm not going to invest in that. It's way too speculative. Forget about that. Let's just address the actual facts right now about this claim that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's kind of connected if you see the dots here. The idea that cryptocurrency, the idea that the blockchain as a strategy will be a currency is pretty laughable. It's very obvious right now it's being used mostly for crime. Like the drug trade literally uses cryptocurrency. It's being used to commit crimes. That's not coincidental. I'm not saying it has to be criminal, but come on, the writing's on the wall. Strategy is centrally important. And Drucker didn't say this. Google is wrong. Now we've already started with one of the main lessons. Google is famous for its culture. Books have been written about it. I already showed you one on accident, whatever, it doesn't matter. The book's called Work Rules. That's why I have this pulled up. The author, Laszlo Bock. This book was published about 10 years ago, and it was a big hit. It was sort of the talk of the town for a while. I've read the book. I like the book. There's some really good stuff in this book. Laszlo Bock's a smart guy. He got his master's degree at the Yale School of Management. He's a smart guy. He was the head of HR, human resources, at Google for about 10 years. This is the book to explain the culture because it's a culture that they're pretty proud of. People have heard about like free food in the cafes, bean bags to set on and just kind of think and be creative about, set on and be creative, foosball tables, billiard ball tables where you can be in this common area and mix with your fellow workers. You can go outside and play volleyball or whatever. You get to use 20% time. So at Google in their culture, they have 20% free time where you can work on projects that you think are most interesting or important. It's this culture that is very much famed and admired. But guess what? They're way behind on AI. Google is the search company for all intents and purposes. We don't say search it, we say Google it. It's become the generic name, like Kleenex is for tissue paper. That's a powerful position to be in. And that's probably the reason they couldn't pivot very well. Chat GPT, Copilot, probably Claude and Perplexity are eating their lunch right now. They're behind. Now they can catch up. Who knows what's going to happen? I'm sure they're pivoting, but we'll talk about that here in a minute more. It's undetermined how that's going to end up. Sundar Pichai, the CEO, we'll see what happens. Who knows? But as it stands right now, they're way behind on AI. It's kind of ridiculous. And yet, they have an amazing culture. How do you make sense of that? Well, I'm going to give you the cheat code. Drucker didn't say it. He wouldn't say it. It's not true. Culture does not eat strategy for breakfast because if it did, Google would not be so far behind in AI right now because they have an excellent culture. All right, let's go further. Let me put this beyond any reasonable doubt. No one can doubt it after what I'm about to show you. This is the book this is the big book. This is the central book. If you wanted to get all of Drucker's teachings in one place, because see, he wrote 39 books. So that's a lot, obviously. If you wanted to get the maximum amount of it in one place, this is the book. As you can see, it's 600 pages in length. And this book was published 2008. Don't even for a second come from me that it's out of date. This book will probably never go out of date. When I say never, that means during our lifetimes. The principles in this book are timeless. He wrote it with his main student, sort of disciple named Joseph Maciarillo. Okay? Drucker actually passed in 2005. This book was published after his death. No problem. This book is phenomenal. And because I have it here on the computer, one thing we can easily do is we can control F and we can search up the word culture to find it in this book. And as you can see, it's 44 times in this book it has the word culture. Now, as it turns out, several of them are agriculture because he talks about a lot of stuff. So it's substantially less than 40 mentions of the actual word culture. And let's go through it because we got to put this to rest. We got to stop with the bullshit. We need the truth. We need to dispel the darkness. It's extraordinarily important. Look at the first one. Let's read this chapter. Change leaders formulate entrepreneurial strategies and look for opportunities to apply these strategies. They also create an internal culture and set of management systems that encourage and reward innovation and entrepreneurship. So you might think here in the introduction, Courtney, congratulations, you just disproved yourself. Already in the introduction, he's talking about the importance of culture. You must be wrong. No, 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 no. You ain't no. That's ridiculous. And it's on the screen why that's ridiculous. Look what he is talking about. He's talking about change leaders in particular, not businesses. The first two words of the paragraph are change leaders. Drucker spoke to organizations across the spectrum, big, medium, and small. He talked about universal principles. He is the GOAT. It's not even really debatable. And in this particular case, the discussion is about change leaders. So that applies to many contexts, but specifically to illustrate the point, we're talking about big business. When you're a big business, let's think about Detroit, Michigan, the car business, right? Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, the so-called big three. We can think of automobiles as an example. When you're a big business like that, you can think of any big business, and you have a product or service, we just use the word product, that serves it's an established product that serves an established market. When you're doing that, you largely focus on efficiency. The Japanese are great at this. This is why they do such a great job with their cars, Toyota, Honda, whatever. Because you might have heard of something called Kaizen. We're not going to get into all that. We can, but for now, it's about efficiencies. So you have an efficiency machine that you're focused on, right? And the reason you do that is because the market is established. For all of our lives, the market for automobiles has been established. We know you need a car. For most of the country, maybe not New York City, Manhattan type stuff, but like from California, where I'm from, we're spread out, except for San Francisco, but most of the state is spread out. Los Angeles is famous for its need for a car because it's so spread out. Anyways, the need is well established, the products are well established, so you drive efficiency. The issue, and Drucker's very clear on this, while you need the efficiency machine, you also need an innovation machine to create tomorrow. One thing that Drucker did say is that the best way to predict the future is to create it. That's true. He did say that. You need to create the future. Predicting the future is not a respectable business. So here's the conundrum. You need this dual budget that Drucker talked about. You have to operate on dual budgets. One budget, which is certainly the larger one, that oversees the efficiency machine working on established products in established markets. The other is a budget for what you might call a skunk works, the R&D or the sort of renegades that are creating tomorrow. And you need to do both of those things in the same company. In fact, there's a professor at the university or at Dartmouth University in New Hampshire. There's a business school, I believe it's called the Tuck School of Business. His name is Vijay Govindarajan, and he writes quite extensively on this very idea. The idea that you need to have two sides, the other side of innovation. You need to have two sides, you need to respect both the efficiency machine and the innovation machine. This needs to be said explicitly because if you don't, as a general pattern, the efficiency machine will just bulldoze the innovation machine because the innovation machine is an investment in the future. It is not producing results today. The efficiency machine is producing results. You see? So it's natural that people gravitate towards that because it produces money. It has a reward right now, here today. The innovation machine is about tomorrow and it's not producing results. It doesn't matter how good your culture is, strategy will be determinative. And think about the car industry still. Electric cars. What percentage of the future will be fully electric cars? We don't know. There's no real way to predict that. There will always be some internal combustion engines, gas engines, because if for nothing else, nostalgia. Right now, we're seeing the transition. There are fully electric cars, of course, quite a few of them, but there's also a big market for hybrids because, there's good reasons for that. Well, it'll be a gradual transition, sometimes spurred on by rules and laws and regulations, whatever. But if you're just going to try to hold on to the past of internal combustion engines, you're a fool. And Detroit's not doing that. There's already a fully electric Hummer, an enormous car, right? Do we need that? Who knows? But we know that electric motors are more efficient than internal combustion engines. So there's already some writing on the wall there. Interesting, batteries are very heavy, so these cars weigh a ton, and energy is a function of how much weight is getting moved through space. So net, I don't know how much savings there are, but whatever. Electric is the future. You can't just hold on to the past. So here, let me show you, and before we go back to Drucker, that culture doesn't eat strategy for breakfast. Because if it did, how do you make sense of Kodak, the film company? Surely, if you know anything about business or if you care to know, this is one of the big case studies. Kodak Film. I don't know if you heard, but over the summer they announced there's a good chance they're going out of business. Here's an article Fortune published on it. Why is this happening? Because film is largely over. There will always be a niche market, niche, whatever the word is, for film. Nostalgia, of course. Polaroid cameras, for example. But the majority, because a better product is digital photography, it's simply a superior technology. And the reason I grabbed this article is because this tells a whole story right here in this little screenshot. This part right here, that's an image of a guy named Steven Sasson who invented the digital camera at Kodak. If you didn't know, yes, it is true. Kodak invented digital photography, the exact technology that is putting itself out of business now. This explains why, because the efficiency machine that ran Kodak film and took care of yesterday's breadwinners controlled. They couldn't make the change to the future. They didn't, for whatever reason, have respect for the innovation machine. It's very hard to accept change for people. It happens at the organizational scale. Kodak in Rochester, New York, was a darling of American business for literally generations. Forget decades, generations. And now they're about to go out of business, and they invented the very product. You could take Google's culture, all the things I just mentioned about this famed culture, you could put that into Kodak and it would still fail because film is an inferior strategy. It's an inferior technology. It's an inferior solution to a problem that people have, which is they want to capture images. You could say capture memories. It's obsolete. It's like a VCR. Forget about it. But it's hard to let go. Culture does not eat strategy for breakfast. Okay, let's keep going. That was one particular thing about change leaders. I went pretty deep because it's important to know. But that's what, in the instance of an internal culture, the word is here. This is the closest the book ever gets to actually somehow suggesting that businesses have cultures like this. Let's go run through it. Next up, we know first a good many things that, however plausible they may seem, do not work in the practice of management. We further know that management is not confined to one country or one culture. This is extremely important. Now we're getting into the main way by far. You're going to see it. The main way that Drucker talks about culture is accurate. It's at the level of a country or a nation. He just uses the word country. Culture exists at the national level. This is not particularly debatable. If you're not familiar, this is a phenomenal book that you should probably, well, I'll teach it to you. This book is heavy. I mean, this is 600 pages. When Leah Greenfeld wrote it, she was a professor at Harvard. She's now at Boston University, and I'll tell you why here in a second. But this book explains it. This book was published in 93. There's no excuse to not know this information at this point. But again, this is a huge book, so I'll spoon feed it to you. I'll give you the most important parts. It's very clear. She talks about five roads to modernity. So she analyzes the culture of five nations. The original nation, which is England, that was the first one. And I know, don't come for me if you think you know political science or sociology. Actually, Courtney, that's not true. Okay, you'll see. This is the emerging science. I bet. I'm not a gambler. I don't do any of that Vegas crap. It's ridiculous, in my opinion. It's not for me. If I were, but probabilities matter, odds matter for sure. If I were a gambling man, and I am in certain ways, I would not literally with money, but like I'm all in on this thesis of nationalism. She explains it beautifully. So she analyzes, let me see, I think the five in this are England, for sure, England, France, because it shows an interesting right across the channel there, Germany, Russia, and the US. I'm pretty sure those, I don't think she does Japan. I'm almost, actually, it could be right here. France, Germany, Russia, um, obviously England. Yeah, so those are the five, and United States. Nationalism is the main organizing principle of consciousness, of the human mind. I'm American, we call ourselves, right? United States is the more accurate word because both North America and South America are the Americas. So they're all the Americas. So the rest of the world traditionally has called us the United States. More and more, they're saying, okay, fine, you want to be called American, whatever. But it's United States. The red, white, and blue, right? The stars and stripes, the Star Spangled Banner, 4th of July, all of these things, the culture is largely dictated, almost exclusively dictated by the nation, by the country. This is not controversial. She's written a trilogy of books. I will explain them all to you in bite-sized pieces. The second book was this one right here, The Spirit of Capitalism, which is fantastic. She explains the origins of capitalism, and it's mind-blowing. It's a big book also, so you probably don't want to read it because it's heavy duty. I'll give you the important parts. In here, she explains Japan. Japan's a great case study because they are descendants of Chinese culture, Chinese civilization. But they have this interesting East meets West thing going on because they have opened up to the West. Partially because this guy named Commodore Perry, the military, came in and almost forced them to open up at gunpoint. Kind of. That's a simplification, but there's some truth to it. But they also, and it explains it in the book, they also realized that some of their old myths and legends were flat out inaccurate. She actually talks about a medical book and how they realized that the West had better medicine. The anatomy was in fact wrong in old Japan. Yada yada yada. We don't need to get into it other than it's a beautiful explanation. And Japan is a certain culture that's much more collectivistic. It's romantic, which is much more embracing of emotions, whereas the United States is more about reason, which you might think is better, especially if you're from the United States and Canada, which are similar cultures. But don't take that too far. I'm not saying that romanticism is better. You need a hybrid. The future will certainly hybridize these two things. We need to put them together. I'm extremely logical, but you can also hear it in my voice. I'm also quite expressive and emotional. It took me a long time to figure all that stuff out. I'll teach it to you over time. But, anyways, Japan is more romantic. If you've ever been there, the art is awesome. I love Japan. They have like kabuki theater is something people have heard of, geishas, this amazing art and these vibrant colors and images, and yet but it's collectivistic. I'll give you an example. The first time I visited Japan was in the early 2000s. And I remember going there. It was on a business trip with one of my business partners, Watanabe-san, who was born in Japan. He's from Japan. And we were there in the wintertime. And one pattern I saw pretty clearly was that a fair number of people were wearing masks, face masks. Now, after COVID, we know they're called those three trifold or the threefold sort of medical masks. They're paper, but they're with those three folds. You surely know what that is by now. That's what I saw quite prominently. I saw about 5 to 10% of people wearing that when we were out in public. You know, Tokyo's a huge city. And interesting little side note, I don't remember seeing any litter. There was like no litter on the ground in Tokyo. It's very clean. It's remarkable. But about these masks in particular, I asked Watanabe-san, I said, hey, what's up with these masks? Are these people afraid of getting sick? And he said, oh, no, 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 no. They are sick. And my mind exploded. I was like, what? Do you mean to tell me you can actually be respectful of other people? You can actually respect your fellow citizens? What a novel, crazy idea. And we saw it because that is American culture. The individual cowboy Lone Ranger thing is pretty excessive. And I love America. I'm thankful to be an American. But we ain't perfect. Let's not kid ourselves. And we saw it during COVID. The number of people that say, I ain't wearing no muzzle, I ain't wearing no face diaper, and they think they're so witty and superior and smart. Ha ha ha. You brainwashed sheep that put on these masks. It's like, dude, this is respect for other people. But Japan has a tradition that is more collectivistic and they understand the importance of respect. I'm not saying we should do it their way. They have problems too. They have lots of problems. We need to combine these ideas. Okay, anyways, respect. This is the reason I talk about that is the difference of cultures. They happen at the country level. Nationalism. I'm not saying it should, I'm saying it is. This is the way it is. The third book, I won't even touch on it much at all right now, but it's about the human mind. This one right here. This book is tremendous. They're all good, but this book is the piece de resistance, right? It's amazing. The mind book. I'll tell you important parts about that. Not right now, but in the future. That's what Drucker's talking about accurately. Country, culture, country. Country, one culture. Now, there's variation within the culture, of course, but that's the basic premise. I don't know that Drucker knew much about Leah Greenfeld. He died in 2005. As you saw, this book was published in 1993. I don't know how much he knew of her work. I know she knew about him because in this book, the capitalism book, she kind of teases him, which I talked to her about. I was like, "Oh, you're teasing Drucker, huh?" Which is fine, fair game. People that are focused on the truth, we don't mind having friendly debates over what's actually true. And she teased him a little. I think she's not wrong, but it's complex. We'll save that for another time. Nonetheless, Drucker knew it. There's a saying, game recognized game, right? Or real recognized real. The truth is the truth, and you can arrive at it from different pathways, and that further confirms that it's true. Culture exists at the country level. Okay. I know I went a lot on that, but you'll see why. Let's keep going. Management is a social function embedded in both a tradition of values, customs, and beliefs, and in governmental and political systems. Management is and should be culture conditioned. What that basically means, hopefully you can understand, is you have to operate within the given culture. If you tried to force American ways on the Japanese, it doesn't work very well. And conversely, if the Japanese tried to force their ways on us, You have to work within the given culture. Never mind Chinese, who are very collectivistic and ethnic, by the way. They believe in genetics. Almost in the West, we'd call that racism. Don't take any accusations. I'm not trying to say, I'm just saying that's the truth. Russia's very similar. That's why they get along so well. Russia's collectivistic and ethnic, which isn't surprising. Geographically, they're right next to each other. But management is and should be culture conditioned. Okay, let's keep going. Let's not dwell too much on that. Hopefully, the point is clear. And if it's not, it will become more clear. Those both are in that same paragraph. We don't need to worry. Okay, next up. Because management deals with the integration of people in a common venture, it is deeply embedded in culture. What managers do in West Germany, in Britain, in the United States, in Japan, or in Brazil is exactly the same. What is West Germany or Germany, Britain, United States, Japan, and Brazil? They're countries. If you read this book, again, she does talk about Germany. It's a very romantic culture, but it's more individualistic. Japan was romantic and collectivistic, whereas Germany is romantic and individualistic. That might seem too complex. Don't worry, it's not. It's just all I'm saying is something that's very you already know this. I'm speaking the obvious. The sky is blue and different countries have different cultures. Drucker is clearly talking about culture as a societal phenomenon. Next, same paragraph, so we won't dwell on it. This one talks about a person named C.K. Snow. Uh, sorry, as you can see, C.P. Snow, Charlie Papa Snow. And we're not going to dwell on that too much. It's in quotes, obviously, two cultures. And what he's arguing, Snow, is that there is a humanist and a scientist. We will elaborate more on this in a minute. You will see. We'll go into it a bit of depth because it's very important. But he's talking about two cultures. Within an organization, you will have humanists and you will and should have scientists both. Those are two cultures and they speak different languages. I'm going to explain that to you in depth here in just a minute. Stay tuned. It's tremendous. Let's move forward for now. This one's agriculture. What do we have here? The mass migrations of the 19th century were either into empty, unsettled spaces, such as the United States, Canada, Australia, Brazil, or from farm to city within the same country. Now, let me stop real quick. I realize the United States was not empty or unsettled. I understand there were lots of natives, indigenous folk. So, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I know that there's some people that are very much into history at the university level that would say that's outrageous. How could he say it's empty or unsettled? Okay, he's not perfect. He's not exactly accurate to say that it was empty or unsettled. Don't dwell on that too much. Let's look at the word culture. By contrast, immigration in the 21st century is by foreigners, foreigner meaning different in nationality, language, culture, and religion, who moved into settled countries. And specifically, imagine immigration in Europe, much more settled, you know, basically the idea is farming, countries that do more farming and don't chase herds of buffalo or bison or whatever. Much less mobile, much more static. Regardless, we don't need to go into that. I know that's going to be a pretty emotional and almost political discussion. You could say, just understand what's being said. Foreigners, meaning countries, between countries, culture, countries. It's in black and white. Drucker did not say this. He would not say that. Anyways, let's move forward. Until the 20s or 30s, every country had a diversity of cultures and markets. There's much more homogeneity right now. You can see it if you go online. Go look at live streamers. They're all basically doing the same stuff. Doesn't matter where they're located. India is a country that's now called Bharat. You can see a streamer in Japan. You can see a cold streamer in South America, Argentina, whatever. You can see a streamer in Italy, and they're all basically doing the same things. It's quite interesting. We're having like a uniculture these days. Not totally, but to some point, which I don't know. Some people get upset about that, but we're humans. We need one of the questions we need to think more about is what do we have in common? Not so much what divides us, but that's a whole different conversation. Nonetheless, country, culture, country, culture. The fastest growing industry in any developed country may turn out to be the continuing education of already well educated adults, comma, and pause. That's kind of why I'm doing this video. I don't need to do this, but we live in the knowledge society, something that Peter Drucker himself identified. You've heard of something called a knowledge worker. He coined that term in 1969 in his book, The Age of Discontinuity. There's not really any question right now. Back in the 90s, the internet was called the information superhighway. That was like one of the first labels, information superhighway. Okay, information's everywhere. So because of that, and it's almost the value of it has gone to almost zero. There's so much deception on the internet. It's kind of unbelievable. It's remarkable at the least. Knowledge becomes a premium. Knowledge turns information into meaning and productivity. The application of knowledge to work is what it means to be a manager. Management is the application of knowledge to work. I'm not going to go deep on that. I could. Let me know if you want that. But the point is, in the knowledge society, continuing education is extraordinarily important. Now, I went to university. I'm not saying you have to, but it's an option. You don't have to. Continuing education can literally happen if you find a good source like me, and that's not humble, but it's accurate. And I'm not taking and hogging all the credit. I give so much credit to my mentors, Drucker, Greenfield, on and on and on. There's no bullshit here. Bullshit is defined as a half truth. If you're spreading half truths intentionally or negligently, you are bullshitting. It is a very real problem. It is a big driver of the sea of anomie. I'll explain that to you another time. But at any rate, this continuing education of already well educated adults is not compatible with those values of youth culture. So you say, oh, there's culture. He's talking about the life cycle. The things that you value in your youth are substantially different from the things you value as you get older. This is not controversial. He's talking about the difference in values based on age, simply age. Drucker talks a lot about demographics. You're going to see it here in a minute. He says that's the first place you should look for changes is in demographics because it's easy to predict. It has a long lead time. The changes in demographics, you can predict those. It's not a prediction. It's the future that's already happened. And they have ramifications a long ways down the road. It's about demographics, basically. It's not about business culture, eating strategy for breakfast. And by the way, I've already clicked on this, so let me talk about it. In 1964, he published this book, Drucker did, called Managing for Results. And he says it was the very first book ever written on business strategy. I don't know if that's exactly true, but I'll take his word for it. Regardless, that's not the point. If the man who claims to have written the very first book on strategy, and pretty much every time he talks about culture, as we see in this book, it's connected to country, and he wrote the first book on strategy, that alone is enough to prove he did not say culture eats strategy for breakfast. Strategy is so centrally important, plus execution, to be fair, but those two things are connected. It's so centrally important, he wrote a whole book on it. He has never written a book on culture. Show me a book that Drucker wrote about business culture, Mr. Mrs. Gemini. Okay, if it's so centrally important, which of Drucker's 39 books was about business culture? I'll wait, as they say online these days. No, I'm not going to wait because it doesn't exist. He didn't say it. Okay, but let's keep going because there's going to be a lot of more kernels, what people call nuggets, like gold nuggets, I guess, or gems in what we have to discuss here. Summary. Remember I just mentioned demographics? Demographic trends are having significant political and economic effects in developed countries. Low birth rates in these countries are escalating political tensions over immigration policies and favor those countries, such as the United States, that have a culture of easily assimilating immigrants. The United States is unique in the world in our cultural ability to assimilate immigrants. The country was founded on immigration, and some might say conquest and colonialism. Okay, I get it. I'm not disagreeing with that, but that's a different conversation. The point is, United States has a culture. Countries have cultures. That's what he's talking about. This one's agriculture. There are substantial internal differences in culture, values, and rhetoric between corporations in different industries. The culture and values is much more noticeable and prevalent between industries. In the Silicon Valley, they all pretty much have the same culture. Google, people talk about it a lot because it was such a darling because it owned search and printed money with its PPC or pay-per-click type stuff. That's changing, but nonetheless, it's the part of the reason it's been such a darling. In the Silicon Valley, you pretty much have all the same culture. You know, in this book, they talk about how Google in systematically in their so-called culture has made this claim that you can be serious without a suit. Listen, I'm from California. That's a Californian idea. They didn't invent that. They didn't come up with it. I knew that long before Google was even a thing, before it even existed. You're going to see me, if you see, I mostly wear cotton t-shirts. I'm not trying to be weird or hip or cool. I know you can be serious as a heart attack without a suit. There's no question. Suits are pretty obsolete. They're archaic. They're dinosaur things. If you want to wear one, go ahead, whatever. Freedom country, do what you want. But don't tell me I got to put on a suit to somehow be serious. It's bullshit. It's smoke and mirrors. It's judging the book by its cover, which we all know is a foolish thing to do. Anyways, between industries, for example, banks everywhere are very much alike. Just because you don't know it doesn't mean it's not true. It's true. I'll give you two examples that are related. Warren Buffett and Jack Welch. Warren Buffett, one of my heroes, big time. He he's still around, 95 years old. He's stepping down here in a couple weeks from CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. He's 95 years old. And in the 90s, he had a huge calamity with Salomon Brothers. They had a big investment into this Wall Street firm called Salomon Brothers, which is essentially a bank, an investment bank, but essentially a bank. Just we'll call it Wall Street. Similarly, Jack Welch, when he was the CEO of General Electric, GE, literally Thomas Edison's company, he purchased a Wall Street firm called Kidder Peabody. And what they both found, now with Buffett, it was a disaster. There was a guy named Paul Rosen or something like that who was cheating the system and violating the rules and laws as he purchased bonds from the government. When the government found out, they shut down Salomon, at least temporarily. That's why Warren Buffett came in and became the temporary acting CEO of Salomon. And he saved it based off of his phenomenal reputation. In fact, after the 2008 collapse, if you know the story, it's in Too Big to Fail. The government literally called Omaha, "Hey, Warren, we need some of your money." He had all the money. I mean, the story of Warren is amazing. The guy's the GOAT, one of the GOATs. He came into Salomon, and what he learned, and they got out of Salomon, by the way. And what Jack Welch learned after doing Kidder Peabody is, as Jack Welch says, in Wall Street, there's only three values. The culture of that industry has three values: my bonus, my bonus, my bonus. It's completely coin operated. And Jack Welch was like, this is gross. This causes all kinds of toxicity. Warren experienced it with Salomon. Welsh did with Kidder Peabody. So he sold Kidder Peabody to a firm that you may have heard of called UBS, Uniform Bravo Sierra. UBS. It's a European firm. They're worldwide, but they're based in somewhere in Europe. I can't remember where. He sold out. He's like, I'm out of this because that's how these Wall Street people operate. Retailers have a different culture. Sam Walton's a good example of how that one works. Manufacturers, it's not between corporations. It's between industries. To the extent that culture exists, it's mostly between nations or societies, but it can to some degree be between industries as well. But it doesn't matter where on the planet those industries are. The banks, UBS, or wherever the world over, have similar, basically, value systems. Anyways, I won't go any further on that. Let's get into the most important part, the theory of the business. If you're going to understand Drucker, and he built up to it, this is obviously on page 91. This is one of the most central things in Drucker is the theory of the business. It's basically another way of saying strategy, but let's not use that synonym yet. Let's get a little bit more thorough. Read here. The theory of the business must be known and understood throughout the organization. That is easy in an organization's early days, but as it becomes more successful, an organization tends increasingly to take its theory for granted, becoming less and less conscious of it. Then the organization becomes sloppy. It begins to cut corners. It begins to pursue what is expedient rather than what is right. It stops thinking. It stops questioning. It remembers the answers but has forgotten the questions. The theory of the business becomes culture. This is the first time he explicitly talks about at the business level culture. And look what he does accurately and with good reason. The word is in quotation marks. Your eyes are not deceiving you because he doesn't even really believe in culture at the business level. Now, let me give a little side note. Am I suggesting that there is zero culture at the business level? No, I'm not saying it's zero, but it's relatively small. I can explain it to you. I'm going to do a whole training on culture, but it's not operative. Look at the next, it's not the most determinative thing. Look at the next sentence. But culture is no substitute for discipline. And the theory of the business is a discipline. Why in the world would Drucker say culture eats strategy for breakfast when culture doesn't even eat discipline for breakfast? This is black and white in front of your eyes. This is black letter law. Well, not law, but this is Drucker's words. This is his book. I know Drucker extraordinarily well. Culture is no substitute for discipline, and the theory of the business, aka the strategy, is a discipline. He never said this. He wouldn't say it because it's not right. More important is the discipline. And read this. The theory of the business has to be tested constantly. It is not graven on tablets of stone. It is a hypothesis. And it is a hypothesis about things that are in constant flux: society, markets, customers, technology. And so built into the theory of the business must be the ability to change itself. Drucker was a huge fan of the United States Constitution, a huge fan, mostly because it solved a problem that had never been solved before, namely succession. How do you succeed? What is the power dynamics? How do you turn over power? A lot of people have a hard time doing that. We saw it in 2020, really for the biggest first time ever. There was not a peaceful transfer of power, but I'm not. Oh, some of you got turned off right. Oh, what's he talking about? Chill. The point is, the Constitution solved the succession problem, at least on paper and at least in theory. Drucker loved that. It also built into itself an ability to change. We know about amendments. You need to have in your theory an ability to change. Drucker explains exactly how to do it. For example, one of the things he says is every few years, you need to put all of your products on trial for their life. Something he called organized abandonment. You cannot create the future if you're stuck in the past. Kodak is the perfect example of that. So the way to create the future, pretty much one of the first steps is organized abandonment. What is the theory? What no longer matches? Kodak film generally, no longer matches the environment. There is now a much superior technology called digital photography. This isn't culture. This is discipline. You have to be disciplined to abandon yesterday in an organized, systematic fashion. Drucker was about system and discipline, not culture. This is universal. This doesn't matter what business you're in. We talked about Detroit and cars. That is very substantially different from photography and film or search with Google. Or another example that we can use, Intel, which is another great case study. Intel was a darling for a long time. They had this marketing campaign called Intel Inside. If you're old enough, you remember. These stickers were on all the computers because Intel was the best processor by far. Today they've got competition, AMD, whatever, but back then for many years it was the juggernaut. But you may not know this. Some people do if you're kind of a business, if you're pay attention to these case studies and stories. Intel started off in memory, random access memory, or what's called RAM. And they were getting slaughtered because they were getting undercut by competitors in Asia. So the CEO at the time was Andy Grove. He started the company with Gordon Moore and Bob Noyce. Moore and Grove were in the conference room and they knew the writing was on the wall. They saw what Kodak could not see, that they were going out of business if they stayed in RAM. They were getting their butt kicked. So they said, what are we going to do? And they said, we should get into processors, the CPU, the central processing unit of a computer. And that's what they did. They made the transition and they dominated for a long, long time. And it's a great example because Grove, he's dead now, but those people were gone and the next generation messed up. It's a remarkable thing because they didn't see the GPU, the graphics processing unit. They thrived by switching from memory to processors, and now they're getting their butt kicked by this company called NVIDIA, for example, which is a darling. Everybody talking about that damn NVIDIA, which look, I like NVIDIA. Jensen Huang's a smart guy. I like what they're doing. That's not the point of this lesson. The point of this lesson is, how did Intel miss that? Well, if you think about the example of Kodak missing a product and a technology that they themselves invented, it's not surprising that Intel failed. They're not totally dead yet, but they're on the way down. We'll see if they can reinvent themselves. They're working on it. We'll see. But what Drucker talks about is not the culture, it's the discipline. Intel, Kodak, and even Google to some extent did not have the discipline to question their theory of the business. Of course, Kodak wants to ride that gravy train forever. Of course, Intel thought the CPU gravy train would never end or wanted to ride it for as long as possible. It's not surprising that Google is stuck in search and not evolving into AI, which, by the way, builds off of GPUs and NVIDIA, if you know the story, whatever. Discipline is not easy, but it's central. This is a big part of the reason why Drucker's the GOAT. The number of people that don't know Drucker is hilarious. And by the way, Laszlo Bock, holler at your boy. I like your stuff. It's funny. One of the cover quotes on this book is from his then 5-year-old daughter named Annabelle. And the cover quote is, "This is a boring book," which is hilarious. So got a sense of humor. I'm cool with that. But look what Laszlo did. Look what he did. Chapter 2 of this book. What is chapter 2 of this book titled? Look at this. Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast. That's the second chapter. Hey, Laszlo, Mr. Bach, sorry. You're wrong. That ain't true. But how could he get it wrong? Let's talk about that for a second. Here's what's pretty clear to me. The reason this quote has gotten such long-running legs and has stuck around is because wishful thinking. Like I said earlier, Laszlo Bock was the head of human resources at Google for 10 years. Human resources. You could argue, and it's probably somewhat largely true, that human resources is the protector and cultivator and nurturer of the culture of any organization. The human resource, right? You can see the connection that they kind of, what they do is culture, you could argue. And it is very common for people to want to believe that their work is the most important work on the planet, right? If you're the chief strategist, well, of course, you would think strategy is the most important. If you're the head of HR, it's not surprising that you would think culture is the most important thing. And all the way, by the way, also some of the feel good stuff. Day to day, it creates what Drucker would call lubrication in the organization, like good manners. We're polite to each other. We have this culture of niceness and teamwork. And yes, that does make the work more pleasurable. So I'm not against culture again, but they're literally getting their butt kicks in the AI wars right now. The only people they're beating are Alexa and Siri, and that's because Amazon and Apple aren't really focused on that. Alexa and Siri, they're ridiculous. They can't hardly answer anything accurate, except for like how old is Robert De Niro and what day of the year is Christmas on this year, that type of thing. You know what I mean? Like the dumbest questions. Siri and Alexa are way behind, but it's voice. I know mostly we don't go there for our answers. We go there to say, hey, Siri, set a timer or whatever. Okay, whatever. Discipline, not culture. Culture is in quotation marks. Okay, let's keep going because I'm going to go through the whole thing. You can always come back. You can pause this. If you don't know, the K button, K for kilo, pauses the video just like the space bar does. J for Juliet goes back 10 seconds. The left arrow key goes back 5 seconds. L for Lima goes forward 10 seconds. The right arrow key goes forward 5 seconds. Surely you know those things. They're important. This is enormous also. The future that has already happened. You need to look, you should look for the future that's already happened. You can't predict the future, but you can leverage and capitalize off of the future that's already happened. We do this in our organization. I'm in leadership development. What I do is build leaders at all levels and from the ground up. And we are one of the fastest growing companies in the United States and Canada because of the future that's already happened. We've identified it and we are building it and capitalizing off of it. It's extraordinarily important. Look what he says. These are the opportunities. Well, let's go to the next. They might be called a potential. The future that's already happened is a potential. But the future that has already happened is not within the present organization, it is outside. It is a change in society, knowledge, culture, industry, or economic structure. The most obvious staring you in the face thing right here is within the same sentence, it says culture is not within the present organization, it is outside. Culture is not within the present organization, it is outside. It is a national societal phenomenon. I'm not saying there's zero culture in business. I'm saying it's relatively small, negligible. Explicitly, he's saying that. There is no shot he would say culture eats strategy for breakfast. It ain't true. Discipline eats strategy for breakfast. Excuse me. Discipline eats culture for breakfast. Discipline, culture is no substitute. It's right in front of your face. And I've heard Laszlo Bock say it. I've heard Satya Nadella in his book, Hit Refresh. He says it also. And I would love, Satya Nadella is one of my favorite leaders. Mr. Nadella, holla at your boy. I'd love to talk to that guy. I can contribute to his life. This video alone could partially do it. But he's building culture. He's turning Microsoft from know-it-alls to learn-it-alls. And that's important. I'm not opposed to that. But ultimately, the key is his change in strategy, his strategic inflection. Because Steve Ballmer didn't do it. So what is he doing, Satya Nadella? He's focusing on three things. Let me think if I remember them. The cloud, augmented reality, and quantum computing. I believe, if I recall, those are the three pillars of the strategy. Maybe not the cloud, actually. Maybe it's artificial intelligence. I forgot. But obviously, we know the investment he did with OpenAI. They also have their own Copilot product. He's gone heavy into the investment on artificial intelligence. Microsoft is doing excellent things because of that strategic shift. And oh yeah, by the way, because so many people at Microsoft were arrogant, thinking they were Bill Gates Jr., that they had, they're God's gift to the world. He realized there were a lot of know-it-alls, and he made this subtle but powerful shift into becoming learn-it-alls. That is a cultural shift, I accept, but it's universal. Like everybody should be learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. Everybody in the Silicon Valley will sure, if they haven't already, will adopt that. It doesn't even matter if you're in banks, if you're in retail, if you're in manufacturing, wherever you are, you should become learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. Know-it-all is the recipe for disaster. Kodak knew it all. And that's why they're going out of business, or apparently going out of business. And, surely will, because film will only be a niche or niche product. It will be used for nostalgia, for sure, but that market is essentially erased. It's become a very fringe thing, like NFTs, the use of the blockchain technology for collectibles, NFTs. Gary Vaynerchuk went all in on that one. He was wildly wrong. He loves to promote when he was right, but he could hardly have been more wrong with NFTs. And it was so easy to predict. Just read this book. When Gary Vaynerchuk went all in on NFTs, I was laughing. I was like, "Oh, that's hilarious." Anyways, let's move forward. It's outside. Culture is outside. Drucker talked about look outside the window. That's a whole different conversation. Look outside the window is a great metaphor or analogy for what you should do. Agriculture, 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 agriculture. This is talking about bacterial culture. So, like a petri dish. So, obviously, completely different. This is part of the problem. Another one of my heroes in leadership or life generally is Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King had this famous quote where he said, "A leader has to be concerned with semantics." It's a great quote. Here, I'll pull it up for you right now. A leader has to be concerned with semantics. And I love you, MLK, but you shouldn't use the word semantics because people don't even know what that means. And because the definition is extremely important, I switched the quote. I took off the quotation marks because he didn't quite say this. He used the word semantics. And again, I'm a huge fan. So here's what the quote actually means. A leader has to be concerned with the meaning of words and phrases. That's true. I agree. That's accurate. So here we have culture, meaning a petri dish. The word culture has multiple meanings. Ruh-roh, which is part of the reason I'm being so thorough here. This is actually a leadership training. That's what I do. That's my thing. I build leaders at all levels and from the ground up. I know that's not humble, but it's accurate. Moving forward, what organizations that use the system structure have in common is a need to integrate diversity of cultures, values, and skills into unity of action. You have to integrate diversity of culture. What if someone's born in Germany? They're going to have a different culture. Like I said, a romantic culture, much more embracing of emotion and things less rational. What matters is a unity of action, execution in service of the strategy, the theory of the business of where are we going. Strategy ultimately means, see, Drucker famously said the only purpose of a business is to create a customer. And the implication of that is there are two and only two core functions, what Drucker called innovation and marketing. Marketing's a tough word. It basically means customer acquisition because it could also mean sales. There's a whole training on the difference between sales and marketing. The difference between sales and marketing is extremely important and it's not obvious. And Drucker, if we're going to go back to the importance of semantics, sorry, not sorry, we have to do it. So basically, innovation means value. So if you have something of value and you sell it, voila, you're in business. Have a product or service of value, sell it to people, create the transaction, customer acquisition, voila, you're in business. Those are the two components of strategy. What is the product or service? I'll just use the word product mostly because it's easier, simpler, more streamlined. And what's our go-to-market strategy? What's our distribution channel? How are we going to make the transaction happen? Sales, marketing, customer acquisition generally. Those two components dictate strategy. Microsoft, I already mentioned Satya Nadella. They have multiple strategies in that company. And you have to understand both. What's the product? What's the sales plan? What's the go to distribution channel? Those two things together are essentially your strategy. Now you have to make it happen with a unity of action. And part of that might be integrating a diversity of cultures. Because at the country level, you have different cultures. This is like at this point, it's like, okay, Courtney, you're beating a dead horse. No, I'm not. We got some more good stuff to come. This is so important. Look at NASA. NASA, for instance, faced the problem of divergent values and cultures. Again, that's where the German thing. You have different cultures. The divergent cultures that come to work for you is a challenge that you need to integrate into a unity of action. Drucker is not recommending some culture. He's recommending execution of the strategy, which is a combination of product and distribution channel. Where are you going? In our company, we make high quality attorneys affordable. That's the offering, that's the service, the product. How do we do it? We utilize direct sales, for example, consultative solution selling, yada, yada. That's the strategy. That's why we're growing so much. Anyways, okay, let's move forward. Page 483, we're almost at the end. Brilliant executives who are being posted abroad often believe that business skill is sufficient and dismiss learning about the history, the arts, the culture, and the traditions of the country where they are now expected to perform. Abroad necessarily means a different country. The word country's right here in the sentence with culture. He's talking about cultures abroad, different countries. Again, that is kind of beating the dead horse. It is perfectly clear. Stop with your bullshit quotes. The truth matters. This one's about separate culture. It's talking about the deconstruct. This is a long discussion. It's worth reading. The Educated Person is a great chapter, but he gives this distinction between what he calls the deconstructionist. There's this debate going on with what an educated person is. He calls the deconstructionists and the humanists. It's a whole discussion. I'm not going to cover it right now. It's not necessarily material. He's talking about a societal force here. Others in this group assert, the deconstructionists, that there can only be educated persons within each sex, each ethnic group, each race, each quote unquote minority, requiring its own separate culture and a separate, indeed, an isolationist educated person. Hitler's Aryan race, Stalin's Marxist genetics, Mao's communist psychology. So it's at the societal level is where he's talking about culture here. Very abundantly clear. The educated person will need, the educated person we need will have to be able to appreciate other cultures and traditions. The great heritage of Chinese, Japanese, Korean paintings and ceramics, the philosophers of religion and religions of the Orient, and Islam, both as a religion and a culture. The educated person also will have to be far less exclusively bookish than the product of the liberal education of the humanists. He or she will need to be trained in perception fully as much as analysis. That's a heavy sentence right there. I probably should do a whole training just on that sentence. But for now, we're going to stick with what we're talking about culture. China, Japan, Korea, the Orient, what we would call, that's an Drucker's old school Asia, or Islam. Islam's not a country. Islam's a religion and a culture, both. The cultures occur at the societal level. The truth will set you free. You need clarity. Sadhguru, I love him. He talks about the critical centrality of clarity, not confidence. He says confidence without clarity is a disaster, which is so obvious to see. Let's move forward. Let's wrap it up. Um, they're talking about here he's talking about what's called the Shining Path in Peru. It's a anti-Western movement extraordinarily anti-Western, probably most anti-Western. And what they want to do is drive the hated Europeans and their culture back into the ocean. So, Europeans, societies, culture, perfectly clear. This is a great chapter, excuse me, a paragraph. Let me read this whole paragraph. This paragraph I could do another training on, but this paragraph is monumental. Tomorrow's educated person will have to be prepared for life in a global world. It will be a westernized world, but also increasingly a tribalized world. He or she must become a citizen of the world in vision, in horizon, in information. But he or she will also have to draw nourishment from his or her own local roots and, in turn, enrich and nourish his or her own local culture. This sentence largely encapsulates the problem that we have today in the political world and the solution going forward. The solution, as Drucker talks, is global tribalism. Global tribalism. That's a contradiction. Yes. And it's true. So that's called a paradox. You're not, look, everybody needs to become a leader. The reason is because you got to get out of the sea of enemy. We explain that with clarity. We'll do it on another one, but another training. And you cannot understand life if you don't have some working knowledge, competence with a paradox, which is defined as a true contradiction. An example would be the only constant is change. The only constant is change. That's a contradiction that is true. It's a paradox. Another one that's very common is you fail your way to success. That's a contradiction. That's also true. Never say never. I finally got a grip when I learned to let go. We could carry on all day long with paradoxes. The one that applies here is the future will be this contradiction where we're simultaneously global and tribal. Yes, that is the solution. There's so many people that don't understand paradox and complexity. Paradox is sort of quintessential complexity. This isn't complicated. Look how simple I'm keeping it. Straightforward. You want to balance simplicity and complexity. They are different sides of the same coin. Einstein, E equals mc squared. Couldn't be more simple. It's literally one multiplication. But the complexity behind that, very few people understand. I couldn't even explain it to you. Many people who are acting physicists could not explain it to you. Make a living as physicists could not explain the theory of relativity. And out of all that complexity, boop, E equals mc squared. That's why Einstein is considered the genius of geniuses, because he took an idea, this complex concept of space-time continuum, and distilled it down to the most elegant simplicity of E equals mc squared. Charlie Munger talks about physics envy. Sorry, Charlie, you're wrong. The world is evolving. We're getting better. We are getting better at simplifying enormously complex things. Now, complication is a different thing. You want to avoid complication. Surgery will always be complex. Like doctor's surgery, what you want to avoid is the complication. You can't avoid the complexity, but you can keep it simple. And if you do that, you can avoid complication. Global tribalism is the future. Okay, I shouldn't have gone too much on that other than to say you will draw nourishment. You want to draw nourishment from your tribe, but you also are simultaneously a citizen of the world. This resistance to globalism is childish. You're listening to this on the internet. Few things are more global than the internet. Ideas and money can transfer anywhere on the planet with a click of a mouse. That's a completely different context. We're all connected now. We can't go backwards. We can't put our head in the sand. It ain't going to work. The toothpaste is out of the tube. The lightning is out of the bottle. Now what? There's an old saying that says you want to think globally and act locally. I agree with that. That's an old saying. You become a citizen of the world in vision, horizon, and information. In addition to information traveling across the globe through the internet with the click of a mouse in seconds, your whole body, your entire organic human body can be anywhere on this planet within one rotation of the Earth on its axis, something we call 24 hours a day. Within 24 hours, you can go from anywhere on this planet to anywhere else. Your whole body, never mind. And then now with the internet, you can do it virtually in seconds. We cannot deny that we are now a globally connected tribe in certain ways, but you need to have your own local roots and draw nourishment and enrich and nourish that culture. Okay, I shouldn't have went so hard on that, other than to say it's culture at the societal level. This is another good one. The educated person, again, this is a great chapter. The educated person will therefore have to be prepared to work simultaneously in two cultures, that of the intellectual, who focuses on words and ideas, and that of the manager, who focuses on people and work. Look at this. If culture eats strategy for breakfast, which culture are you talking about? See, we talked a minute ago about the two different cultures that exist within the company, the culture of the innovation machine and the culture of the efficiency machine. Vijay Govindarajan talks a lot about it. There's two cultures. Drucker also talks at length about this. I would, you can read Govindarajan if you want. Just for now, start with Drucker, if I'm being honest. But there's those two cultures of an efficiency machine and an innovation machine. Profiting from yesterday, building tomorrow. Those are fundamentally different cultures. Also, the culture of an intellectual who works with words and ideas is substantially different from the culture of a manager who focuses on people and work. And you need both of those within your organization. And they pull in very substantially different directions. As a leader, as a manager, you need to integrate these things. You can call it hybridize, synthesize the two things. Let me give you another example of another of my real world favorite leaders. It's this guy right here. You probably don't recognize him. That's fine. His name is Jimmy Iovine. He's one of my favorites. He's the guy who started Interscope Records. He's the Interscope Records guy. He's in the music industry. I love this guy. His stuff is solid. He's never written a book, and the reason he says he won't write a book is because he refuses to write more books than he has read. He is not a reader. He's a talker. Fair enough. No problem. Let me show you what he talked about. By the way, he started Interscope Records, and then he partnered up very quickly with a guy named Andre Young. The world knows him as Dr. Dre. They're partners. Dre had something called Aftermath, whatever, that's his label, and they're teamed up. They subsequently created a product called Beats by Dre. They're headphones. You know what Beats are, most likely. Beats headphones. It was this guy, Jimmy Iovine, along with Dr. Dre, that teamed up to build that. Listen to what he said. Now, by the way, well, I'll just play it and then we'll explain.
Because remember, when I met Steve Jobs, the first thing he said to me was we're crossed between technology and the arts. And no one else had ever said that to me, it just stuck with me. And I said, okay. And so when I had Beats, I said, oh shit, this is what he's talking about. I can't find people that understand both languages or understand each other. It's like you either get this or this.
Excellent, concise, clear explanation of essentially what Drucker's talking about. You either get this or this. In the case of the technology and the arts, if you know a scientist, we can functionally call technology science interchangeably. It's not exactly right, but it's close enough. And then arts is humanities. Those two personalities are substantially different, almost fundamentally different. Now, what Jimmy's saying by saying that no one had ever said that to him before is, I know Jimmy Iovine doesn't know much about Peter Drucker, because Drucker's been saying this for a long time. By the way, Mr. Iovine, if anybody knows him, this is probably the main person I'd love to hang with. I am a huge fan. Satya Nadella, Jimmy Iovine, Dr. Dre. I mean, I'd love to hang with those guys. I got some stuff I could contribute to their life, and I've got a few questions, and I'm a huge fan of this guy. He did it pretty much. I don't know all the details. I'm sure there's the music industry is rough and tumble, but he did it largely right. And the reason he was talking to Steve Jobs is because of this thing called Napster, and I won't go too deep into it, but he was up there trying to figure out what are we going to do now that we have file sharing, aka Napster. And then it was with Jobs that they developed iTunes and streaming services, which own the music industry today in many ways. Spotify subsequent to iTunes and in competition with iTunes. But that's how he got introduced to Steve Jobs. And Jobs said the first thing he said, apparently, let's listen to it again.
Because remember, when I met Steve Jobs, the first thing he said to me was we're crossed between technology and the arts. And no one else had ever said that to me, and it just stuck with me. And I said, okay. And so when I had Beats, I said, oh shit, this is what he's talking about. I can't find people that understand both languages or understand each other. It's like you either get this or this.
Now, Steve Jobs first learned that lesson that you want to stand at the intersection of science and the humanities, another way of saying it. He learned that from Edwin Land, a guy named Edwin Land, who was the founder of the Polaroid camera company, the Polaroid film company. That's where he first heard the idea. And where Steve Jobs lived the idea is with the Pixar animation studio. Steve Jobs purchased and owned Pixar, the animate, that makes those animated movies with Disney. And there, all of that, these are like Toy Story, the first movie, I'm pretty sure it was the first movie completely created on a computer. Disney had been doing animated stories for a long time, but that wasn't all on a computer. Pixar put it all on a computer. That's all technology. A guy named Ed Catmull, whatever. That's technology. But what's his name? John, I forgot his name. Lester? Whatever. The director of the movies. Making a movie is an art. Telling the story is very much an art form. So what Jobs had to do, and he spent a long time and did a pretty good job at Pixar of integrating these two cultures. The culture of science and the culture of humanities are at odds with each other. They are substantially different. They kind of drive each other crazy a lot of times. And it was happening at Pixar, and they were able to integrate these two things through a unity of action, like we talked about earlier with Drucker. We need to focus on the customer, produce a product that's good, and Pixar has a great record. Toy Story was obviously a smash hit. There's many of them. Moana is one that pops in my head. I love Moana, but so many. Like their track record is unbelievable. But what they've done is integrated technology and the arts. And Jimmy Iovine realized with Beats headphones that he had to do the same thing because the science, the technology was the actual headphones, right? All the different pieces of, I don't know, what are they, woofers and tweeters or whatever, all the different components of a headphone is. I don't even know. I don't even care. But it's also art because it's delivering emotion and an experience of music. Iovine had to do the same thing. That's essentially what Drucker's talking about. It's easy to say, it's remarkably difficult to do. And I'm spending some time on this because you're going to see, if you don't know this already, this is the future that's already happened. We teach it at scale. Drucker used slightly different words, but we need to bring these two things together. This is universal. Whether you're doing headphones with Beats, whether you're doing animation with Pixar and Steve Jobs, whether you're doing Kodak, or whether you're doing Intel processors, NVIDIA, doesn't matter what your solution is, the product that you're offering the market. You need to integrate the work of the intellectual with the work of the manager, as Drucker would say. Or conversely, you need to integrate technology and the arts, these two separate cultures. And you do that with discipline. The theory of the business. What is the purpose of Pixar? What does it do for the world? What change does it make in the world? It tells these great stories. The story of Toy Story and friendship. The story of Moana and ice and sort of the rigidity of culture. Remember that song, How Far I'll Go? Everyone on this island seems so, what was it? Everyone on this island seems so happy on this island or whatever. They all have their place. They all have their place. And she was looking at the ocean. Who knows how far I'll go? Like she had this ambition. Sadhguru talks about every human yearns for limitlessness or boundarylessness. And here we have this cute little Moana explaining that through amazing story. And her friend Maui and all. It's a great movie. Whatever. Doesn't matter what the product or offering that you give to the market. These are universals. Okay, let's go forward. Let's wrap it up. A good many people in the knowledge society will actually live and work in these two cultures at the same time. I just covered that exhaustively. We're in the knowledge society. It's there's no real debate here. And many more should be exposed to working in both cultures, the cultures of intellectual and manager, aka scientist and humanist, aka technologist and artist. That's what the key cultures that you need to understand. Don't buy into this bullshit. People can't even explain to you what culture is. I can. I will. A lot of it comes from Leah Greenfeld and others, but that's we'll save that obviously for another time. This recording should only be so long. I'm not worried about making a long recording. You can pause, you can come back to it. Like, give me a break. Um, this is monumental information. All educated persons in the post-capitalist society will have to be prepared to understand both cultures. This is a great little phrase. He wrote an entire book called The Post-Capitalist Society. And yes, we are in the post-capitalist society. That doesn't mean Marxism. That doesn't mean communism, socialism. No. What it means is in capitalism, in the capitalist society, the most valuable resource was capital, money, land, labor, and capital. That is over. Not totally, it's not gone. What he's saying, what Drucker says, is that the most valuable asset today is knowledge. And that's not just bullshit. Like Warren Buffett likes to joke. Warren Buffett's from Omaha, Nebraska, and he loves watching the Nebraska Cornhuskers football team play, right? He loves watching the football. College football is great. And he has this joke. He says, they asked the offensive lineman at the Cornhuskers, University of Nebraska football team, they said, "Hey, what does that N on your helmet stand for?" And the football player thought for a second and he said, "Knowledge." Warren likes to make that joke. So, anyways, whatever. Knowledge is the central resource of the knowledge society of our current situation. The most valuable thing is knowledge. That's kind of weird. It's kind of esoteric, but it's accurate. We need a whole new economic theory now. It's being worked on. A guy named Paul Romer at Stanford, others. It's being worked on. But the reason it's it's upending so many things is because in capitalist society, the three main resources, land, labor, and capital, were all limited resources. This thing called elasticity. And basically, what it means is it's a scarce resource. Economics traditionally has been the study of the allocation of scarce resources, land, labor, and capital. Knowledge is fundamentally different. In a lot of ways, it's the opposite. Talk about a paradox. Knowledge is not scarce. In fact, the more people have knowledge, the more valuable it becomes. It's just the opposite of scarcity. And that's freaky. I don't know all the answers. We don't even have a good economic theory yet, but it's being worked on. Nonetheless, the point is, if we live in a knowledge society, the post-capitalist society, capital's not over. It's still important. It's not going to ever go away, just like the radio hasn't gone away. But television and it's going to keep advancing. Now knowledge is the key resource. And if you understand that, you understand why I'm willing to make this investment. You also understand why I insist that this is recorded. I'm not going to keep repeating this stuff every day. My time is limited like anybody else's. So if you want to learn this stuff, here's the video. Go watch it as many times as it takes until you get it. It's critically important. Knowledge is the key resource, and an enormous barrier is bullshit. Fabricated nonsense that only contributes to the sea of enemy, the deep, dark forest of confusion. Wrap it up. The educated person will have to be able to understand the world's cultures, religions, and traditions and not limit himself or herself only to knowledge of the Western civilization. Again, culture at a civilization, society, national level. That's what cultures are. And then we get into footnotes. Um, Edgar Sheen, he talked a lot about business culture, and there's that's worth knowing, but I would study Drucker first. If you had to choose between Edgar Sheen, who's a good smart guy, choose Drucker first, of course. And then we get into like Landmarks of Tomorrow, his book in 1959. An educated society, economic development, the decline of the effectiveness of government, and the collapse of Eastern culture. Eastern, civilizational culture. Very clear. And now we're into the index, agriculture. The word culture supposedly only appears on pages 12 and 23. If it is centrally important, my friend Gemini, Google, if it is centrally important, then why does it only appear on pages 12 and 23 of a 600-page book? Hmm? 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 Culture of Japan. Culture of Japan, literally 12 and 23. Management, managers, as culture, 1223. 2 pages. Irrelevant, not irrelevant, but way oversold. Culture does not eat strategy for breakfast. It's bullshit. But when let's come down. I haven't done this ever. Let's come down and check out Theory of the Business. Theory of the Business. Look at how much citations on Theory of the Business. Just on the index alone, which is more important, culture or Theory of the Business? Get out of here with that bullshit. Drucker did not say culture eats strategy for breakfast. Drucker would not say it. And it's not true.